Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are. Bonjour, bonsoir, and bonne nuit. I hope I got that correctly. So today I'll be talking about crude oil spills and birds in Nigeria. In Africa, Nigeria, you can see, is the higher produces oil in the highest quantity as compared to other countries, and sometimes these spills could potentially lead to some problems. We don't know, but I think that's partly what we'll be hearing today. Almost 50% of Nigeria's revenue is gotten from crude oil. But then as oil is being produced, it could lead to some environmental challenges as a result of oil spills from leakages, as well as okay, now my PowerPoint is messing me up. Sorry. Okay. Sorry about that. So apart from crude oil spills from leakages, other causes of crude oil spills are artisanal refining, which is it's practically everywhere in the southern part of Nigeria. With bunkering activities, this crude oil is stolen from oil pipelines and then refined into other things. As a result, crude oil spill is now seen as one of the anthropogenic activities that continues to impact ecosystems alongside logging and plastic pollution, especially in these areas where you get to find most of the spills. Now, we know that Nigeria is a tropical country and it's home to a vast diversity of species, mammals, reptiles, birds. And as a result, it's critical for us to understand how this happens, because you can see here, we have oil exploration sites overlapping with, important ecosystems within this region. This is the southern part, or where in Nigeria we refer to as the Niger Delta region, and it's oil rich. So when crude oil spills happen, we can find habitats and ecosystems in this form: grassland, aquatic ecosystems. You can see forests, mangrove ecosystems. Moving from that, and then it becomes degraded into what we now find in this slide. But why are we interested in birds? Because sometimes it's difficult to actually drag or point out some of these problems and put solutions to it using humans. But then with birds, we can actually do this because they are excellent barometers of environmental health, as well as they have longer generation times, with which we can study what happens as you move from one generation to another generation of this species. And so this is relevant because in the southern part, we all know that ornithology it has been in Africa, but in some parts of Africa, it just is beginning to grow and gain momentum. As a result, we do not have pre-spill information, and sometimes it could be difficult to make environmental impact assessment in these areas. Again, most study of crude oil spill or the influence of crude oil spill on bird species has always focused on certain species. And so we decided to look at community level study here because it's going to provide a broader perspective on how crude oil spill could affect bird species, as well as understanding the temporal effects of crude oil spills on bird communities can enable us suggest habitat management and conservation decisions within these threatened ecosystems to conserve the species and habitat. So our aim was specifically to understand how crude oil spills could affect the richness and abundance of bird species. And as a result, we could ask questions like, how does crude oil spills affect the abundance and richness of bird species? And is the effect of crude oil spill on bird abundance and richness influenced by the time since a spill event occurred? So we went all the way to the Niger Delta part of Nigeria. This is where Nigeria is located in western part of Africa. We went all the way down here to the creeks, the mangrove, and then we surveyed bird species within this region. So we had 8 sites. We had 8 sites there, and on this 8 sites, we had reference sites and impacted sites, sites that have experienced crude oil spills. So in Nigeria, regions are divided into local government areas. So this work was done in Warri South local government area and Ughelli North local government area of Delta State, Nigeria. So we had 57 impact points and 44 reference points. And we also had to request for crude oil spill disturbance history from people that were resident at these various sites. So after surveying birds, usually our survey method implied that we went out 6:30 to 10 in the morning and then 3:30 to 6 in the evening, surveying birds across the 57 points and 44 reference points across these 8 sites. And the study was conducted around October to November of 2019. So from the data we collected, we were able to calculate species, that's bird species abundance and richness using vegan. We have used the single term design against the before after control impact design, that's the BACI design. That's because the before after control impact design will require that you have pre-spill information. Sadly, we do not have that information here. So we had to use the single term design where we would need to sample birds in an impact site and a corresponding adjacent site to tell the differences across the sites. So we built a mixed effect model where we had introduced site section and points as random points. And that's because as random factors, and that's because the sites were, like I said, we had 8 sites scattered across 2 local government areas. So we understand that, of course, there was going to be some variation in species as a result of sites. And then birds sampled in the morning and the evening, we know that session could also impact our data as well as points. Remember, I said 57 points of impact sites, while 44 reference sites. So it's unbalanced. So we had to control for the bias. All of this will occur. So our treatment in this case referred to if a site was impacted or was just a reference site, while the exposure was referred to the duration since when a spill event had occurred. Now, after collecting the crude oil spill disturbance history from residents of the area, we had to categorize it into sites that had spills ongoing, and then we had sites with less than 24 months of crude oil spills, and then sites with greater than 24 months of crude oil spill. So this mixed effect model was built for richness as well as abundance. Now, our findings. Across the survey, we came across 3,633 individuals belonging to 124 species of 41 avian families. And for migratory birds, we saw the wood warbler, we saw the common sandpiper, we also had the common swift, we had the black kite, and then we had the spotted flycatcher. Also, for birds of conservation importance, we had the gray parrot, and this was one of the reasons I had to make the drawing I eventually did, which earlier spoke about. So, our results. From here, we can see that bird species richness significantly in the graph A, we can see that bird species richness significantly differed between impact and reference sites, with reference sites having more bird richness as compared to impact sites. And then for bird abundance too, you can see reference sites again having more bird individuals as compared to the impact site. So of course, with p-values less than 0.01 here, we know that yes, crude oil spills significantly affected the abundance and richness of birds. Our second question was to see how, if this influence of crude oil spill on bird species richness significantly changed over time. And from our results here, you can see that when we built the interactive model between exposure time and treatment, it was significantly different here. The interaction was significant. Thus, telling us that yes, that the changes over time can be seen as differently when you look at impact and reference site. Now, a fine scale view would show us that here you can see that bird richness differed significantly at ongoing sites. ONG referred to ongoing sites, with reference sites having significantly higher bird richness as compared to the ongoing site. And you can see it here. But for the reference site, there was no significant difference across ongoing less than 24 and greater than 24 months. So even though we can see bird richness increasing as you move from the ongoing to greater than 24, this difference wasn't significant. But when we came to the impact side, you can see that ongoing had lesser bird richness as compared to less than 24. And this difference was significant, as when you also look at ongoing and greater than 24, you can see also a significant difference too. So this tells us that as time progressed, of course, the impact of crude oil spill is felt at the onset of the spill. But as you progress over time, this impact is no longer felt, as over time, when you compared impact and reference sites at less than 24 months, there was no significant difference. Also, when you compared impact and reference sites at greater than 24 months, we couldn't find any difference. Again, we looked at the influence of crude oil spill on bird species abundance, and we can see that, of course, there is a significant effect of the exposure. However, when you look at just the reference sites, yes, there is an increase over time, because here we have a lower bird abundance, but it increased over time. Looking at the green line graphs, it increased over time, but then this difference here wasn't significant. But when you come down to compare what was happening at the impact site, again, you can clearly see that at the ongoing site, crude oil bed abundance was significantly higher at reference site as compared to the impact site. It was also the same for less than 24 months. But here we cannot, sorry, I missed that wrong. I said that wrongly. Here, between less than 24 months, at sites where spills had occurred less than 24 months, bed abundance did not significantly differ when reference sites were compared to impact site. Same for greater than 24 months. But when you paid attention to the impact site, we could see a significant difference here between ongoing and greater than 24 months, telling us that, of course, at the onset of the spill, we can see we would have a reduced abundance in bird species, but after 24 months, the birds eventually begin to come back. So what do these results mean? First of all, it tells us that the influence of crude oil spill on bird species abundance and richness is highest at the onset of a spill event. Also, crude oil spills have negative effects on bird richness and abundance, and these effects could be indirect or directly. Now, indirectly, crude oil spills could affect bird abundance because birds need vegetation, and crude oil spills change the vegetation of this habitat. You can see in A that this is not disturbed with by crude oil spill, but in B, this is a site with ongoing crude oil spill, and you can see how this habitat looks like. And if we look at C, this is after 24 months, and you can see what it is like over here. So indirectly, crude oil spills, when it deny bird species vegetation, which they need for feeding opportunities, covering from predators, and nesting grounds, these birds will eventually move from areas where there is a spill and to areas where there are no spills. Again, but as time increases over time, the area moves from what we see in B to somewhat like what we have in C. And then we could find some of these birds returning back. Perhaps that's why after 24 months, we have greater species abundance and richness. Again, crude oil spill could affect richness directly through ingestion. For example, in A here, these pictures were actually taken by me. We could see a lizard here, which doesn't have any crude oil spill on its body. And then we have another one at B with crude oil on its body. Now, because most birds are top predators, when they try to feed on this species, it affects them directly because some studies by Pejewski has shown that over time, these crude oil spills, the polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbon in crude oils could result to cancer and thereby resulting in long-term effects on this species, reducing their reproductive rate and also causing cancer in their bodies. Also, we can see here we have the woolly-necked stork in A that was affected by crude oil spill in B. And this is because the woolly-necked stork will pick its food sometimes from water. Now, because the spill covers the water, when they try to pick their food or try to feed, and then they shake their head, the spill eventually affects their plumage. Now, when this happens, it's already affecting the feeding of this bird, not just affecting the feeding of this bird, it destroys the plumage. Now, for species, remember I had to talk about migratory species also when I was giving us an introduction into what our result look like. For species that are migrants, it's difficult for them to go back to their to their breeding grounds. Not just species that are migrant, species that are migrants that show site fidelity will also be disturbed, because when it is time to come to this site and they show site fidelity, they come here and they can't find the environment usually where they would come to winter. And that's why we say crude oil spill could affect birds through timing of spill events. Earlier on, I showed you a picture where the grasses were also destroyed. For resident bird species, some birds nest in grasses on the ground. Now, when spill occurs, it destroys those grasses, it destroys the ground. So even this also will affect the reproduction of this bird species going forward. So these are some part of the ecology of bird species that could be affected when there is a spill event. So what do we know? Now, crude oil spills result in habitat destruction since soil invertebrates and vegetation cover are destroyed. Now, soil invertebrates are needed to turn the soil and also make the ground fertile for grasses and other vegetation to thrive. But when there is a spill event, these soil invertebrates are also destroyed, and it has to take maybe some cleaning events or time for this soil to return back to normal. Studies by Khan has even showed even over time, because of the crude oil spills make the ground hardened, it's also still a bit difficult for vegetation to immediately thrive on these soils. So it results in the displacement of important roles played by birds within the ecosystem. And when there is a displacement of these roles, it leads to cascading effects within the environment. So when the grasses are destroyed, granivores or insects that depend on these grasses will also not thrive well. And then it also eventually affects other fauna that depend on the insects, which in this case would include insectivorous birds. And then for granivores, it also destroys the grains, the grasses, and they can't find food to eat, as well as denying them of their nesting sites or hides from predators. So crude oil spills negatively affect bird abundance and richness. That has been established. And also, yes, over time, bird abundance and richness may recover, but as a result of research that has been conducted by some others that shows long-term effect, it could also still lead to decline in bird richness and abundance. And sometimes it could take a lot of time for this species to return back. Sadly, we couldn't go beyond, because you may want to ask why it was greater than 24. So the site we found at the time was just maximum 60 months. So we couldn't go beyond that. And as a result, we can't actually tell at what point, if there is no cleaning events, can these sites return back to normalcy. Again, since birds are bioindicators, the threats crude oil poses to birds can also extend their impacts to humans. That's because, for example, some humans would, if crude oil destroy soil invertebrates and it stops grasses from growing, denying birds from feeding, it's also there is also that huge tendency that it will stop cultivation of crops, and it will just continue to impoverish residents of this area. Not just that. Now, even fishes, in toxicology, there is what is called biomagnification, bioaccumulation. Now, when these polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons are stored in this bird species, over time, they begin to exert long-term effects, cancers, and the rest. If humans could feed on even fishes or they go to fish in these waters, of course, they would also might suffer this effect of polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. Again, we can see that crude oil spills denied, for example, the woolly neck stock of its food or when it tried to feed. So if crude oil spills destroy soil invertebrates, of course, it could also destroy other aquatic organisms that residents of these areas might depend on, not just for food, but also for other economic activities. Now, future directions, we'll compare what we see on the impact side and the reference side. Looking at the impact side, this is a rank abundance plot for the impact side, and this is a rank abundance plot for the reference side. Common bulbul is an omnivore, feeds on fruits as well, and insects, so it's an omnivore. Olive-bellied sunbird also is a nectarivore. It also picks insects. Ethiopian swallow, also an insectivore. Bronze mannequin is just the granivore we have there. We come over to the reference side, we can see bronze mannequin topping, and we can also see black and white mannequin as well, topping, coming top 4. Now, these species are granivores, but if you look at the impact site, they have abandoned the impact site, and you can find them at the reference site. This also tells us that, okay, for specific species, crude oil spill holds a strong impact on them. Again, if you look at this is more slanty between common bulbul and olive-bellied sunbird as compared to bronze mannequin and common bulbul. And when you look at the impact site, one species is dominating, that's the common bulbul. And if you compare that to the reference site, it's more like the species are evenly spread, though a clear difference can be seen with what we see on the impact site as compared to the reference site. Thus, we propose that a final scale study be done that investigates the impact of crude oil spill on avian feeding gills. This is particularly important because of the reasons I have mentioned earlier, for us to know what species particularly suffer from this menace. Again, why would recommend cleanup exercises after crude oil spill event? It will also be necessary to investigate if bird communities will respond positively to the cleanup and what bird communities will respond to this. Because most cleanup events has shown to use some chemicals, but of course vegetation grow, but we can't tell what impact these chemicals may have. Also, we know that there have been other studies that has shown to use biological cleaners to clean crude oil when there is a spill event. So I will have to thank APLORI or the Leventis Foundation Nigeria through APLORI because they provided funding for this research. This is Dr. Talatu, Dr. Adams, and Dr. Talatu and Dr. Adams were very instrumental in this research. They helped me build the concepts, and we specifically went to the field to collect the data. Dr. Bashep was also instrumental as she helped out in the concepts too. Dr. Sam also sort of advised in the data analysis. Sometimes I got confused. Okay, but then if I take into account this and this, is it good? Or so I always run back to him to ask these questions. Now, Mr. Henry Erikowa is a native and from Delta State, particularly the Shekiri area, and he tried to ensure that I had no issues going to these remote, very remote areas, because most of my surveys were done on islands. So going to these remote areas, I needed Mr. Henry Erikowa, and he helped in making me, in achieving that. While Patience and Sholaye were majorly field assistant, if you know Nigeria very well, we have over 450 languages. So sometimes when you're visiting a particular area, you need to go with a native that understands the language. If not, you might be seen as a foe rather than a friend. And because crude oil is a very serious matter in the southern part of Nigeria, you have to be very careful. There were challenges on the way, because I think I was arrested once too, but these guys came to my rescue to explain what I was doing. So the greatest threat to our planet is the belief we have to do. Thank you so much for listening.
Who said